For the past few weeks, I've been talking about the Great Forgetting, which is the largely successful progressive attempt to progress back into a past of centralized power by elites, while the rest of us wallow in primitivism, emotionalism, vice, and excess. And you can see this great forgetting in just the casual use of sex, drugs, and foul language, the way people cover their entire bodies with tattoos, the music we have that emphasizes loud, simplistic rhythms and is accompanied often by grotesque examples of female display and male aggression, and in the metal, people put in their faces as if they were living in the Amazon instead of in Scarsdale. All these little things show us that we're regressing back to a kind of primitivism. And note that I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. I'm just calling it primitivism because that's what it is. It's a regression to a previous way of being, a pre-Christian way of being. Now, the Great Forgetting did not come about naturally or accidentally. It's the result of a purposeful 70-year project by the left to erase the moral and intellectual legacy of Christian/European culture, which is, you can picture it as sort of the communion table at which America ate the bread of Greek rationality and the wine of Jewish morality, which is really what constitutes the culture we began with. The recent pandemic lockdown was, as far as I'm concerned, a mind-numbing display of elite incompetence, authoritarianism, and did I mention incompetence? But nothing in the last year was as heartbreakingly revelatory, to me at least, as the willingness of churches to bend to the senseless will of these petty, secular, and did I mention incompetent authorities. It was very much as if our religious leaders themselves no longer believed in the worth of our religion and its importance in our lives. The Great Forgetting has reached them too. Even the priests have forgotten what they're preaching about. Churches were told to shut down, and like little children, they obeyed. And the hatred of materialist, secular powers for the faith of the people, because the faith of the people is a challenge to their values and their power, that hatred was so incredibly evident in the government orders that left Walmarts and liquor stores open, but denied Christians access to the communion, which is the bread and wine of our spiritual life. The pettiness and the ugliness and the wickedness, and did I mention incompetence, and the official hostility to God, they were all evident in these nasty little orders that kept coming across, forbidding singing in church. I don't know if that happened in your state. It happened to us in California. They forbid singing. They denied parking privileges to churches. John MacArthur's Grace Church in Los Angeles, when it had the temerity to remain open and say, he came on my show, John MacArthur, and he said, we're not here to protect you from the flu. We're here to protect you from eternal damnation. And so we have to remain open, even if there's a risk of your getting sick. So they tried to cancel his parking privileges. They were just incredibly petty to any church that stood on their God-given and coincidentally constitutionally protected rights to the free exercise of their religion, all of which serves to remind us that our governing class, governors and mayors and federal officials, they are now largely a bunch of small, power-hungry, and did I mention incompetent people, elevated by a corporate press and corporate culture that despises any spiritual force that leads us away from the materialist, consumerist, hypersexualized apathy that is a sure and certain path to political slavery and therefore consolidates the power of our morally broken and intellectually empty leaders. This is the Great Forgetting in action, right? This is the powers that be making sure that to detach us from our Christian and our European cultural roots. And to me, it's a terrible thing to see our priests and pastors collaborate with these moral buffoons. Priests, pastors, the church has abandoned the gospel for political fads. Banners on churches celebrate gay pride, Black Lives Matter, diversity, which again, I'm not talking about whether those are right or wrong. They're just not the gospel. They have forgotten the gospel. Those are the opposite of the gospel. The gospel abhors pride, gay pride, and every other kind of pride. It denies the importance of race. It says we are all one in Christ. It denies that your identity is primarily sexual. And it is not defined by diversity. The gospel has nothing to do with diversity. It is about the way the Spirit takes our sacred individuality and brings it together, unifies it as part of one church, the way individual limbs and organs are different parts of one body, or the way dads and moms and children play different roles in one family. But if the powers that be in both the church and the state are desperate to contribute to the great forgetting, to have us forget who we are, if they are so angry at the past and sick in their own minds to claim that our Western legacy is somehow stained because it comes from people whose epidermises happen to be white, and rather than saying that culture is incredibly elevated by the unfathomable brilliance of Greek, Hebrew, Roman, and European ideas, if they have abandoned us, if they have told us, ordered us, commanded us to forget, we have to ask ourselves, what is our response going to be? What would it mean? What would it look like for us to start remembering our legacy? And how can we reclaim that legacy while proving what was always true? It's not a white legacy. This is just garbage as far as I'm concerned. It's a human legacy. We are all made in the image of God, says so right in the book, and the bread and wine are there for anyone who will come to the table. So I listen to conservatives a lot, especially young conservatives with big ideas about where things should go. And I hear a lot of stuff. I hear conservatives say we have to restore belief in good and evil. And that sounds good, but you know what? The left has their idea of good and evil. They're a bit dishonest about what they think good and evil are, but it's not true that they don't believe in good and evil. And I hear right-wingers say we have to restore our faith in God. And yes, I think that's true. I think we have wandered far afield from faith in God, and our churches are, as I say, have abandoned the faith and are emptying out incredibly quickly. But we also have to understand, and sometimes Christians hate to hear me say this, but we have to understand that there are legitimate challenges to traditional beliefs that come from science and come from technology. Monks used to ring when there would be lightning storms. The monks would run up into the tower because they thought the lightning came from demons, and they would ring the church bells to fend off the demonic lightning. And of course, because they were high up, the lightning would hit the tower and kill the monks, right? They found out, Benjamin Franklin helped them find out that lightning rods work much better for chasing off the demons. And that changes our sense of how the world works. And Christians have to address that. They cannot just get stuck in the way things used to be. Jesus Christ is, as they say, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. But there are prejudices and superstitions and mistaken traditions that attach themselves to a system of belief over time. And those can be changed as time goes on. We have to be careful not to kowtow to the social and political fads of our corrupt moment, but we should also be careful not to romanticize the certainties of the past they were themselves innovations, interpretations of Christ's word. The old-time evangelical religion, you've heard the song, "Give Me That Old-Time Religion." It's actually one of the most modern forms of Christianity there is. And the older Catholic forms that get the bragging rights because they've been around since Jesus, they have changed enormously over time. During the Reformation, the Catholic religion changed tremendously. So these ideas that we have, these kind of grand or vague ideas, don't really play that much for me. I want to know more about what exactly I should be doing every day and you should be doing every day. And there are other ideas, political ideas from the right about how we can restore our culture. You've heard about Catholic integralism. They kind of flirt with a theocratic notion where the government is going to enforce the common good, as they call it, which is largely defined by the church. Some of them actually say we should only allow Catholics to immigrate so that the country becomes more Catholic. There are conservatives who attack censorship and cancel culture, but they say the censorship and cancel culture aren't wrong. It's only that the left is censoring and canceling the wrong things. And there are a few people on the far right. These people are not really central to the conservative movement, but there are some who actually agree with the left's racialism from the other side. They're as obsessed with preserving the whiteness of America as the left is obsessed with destroying the whiteness of America. Now, the problem with all of these ideas for me is that in the old days, when we did to some degree enforce religious morals, there was a consensus in society that these religious ideas were good. And that consensus has been destroyed, right? This is part of the great forgetting, is that consensus has been destroyed. So the problem is if you force religious ideas on people who do not have a consensus of agreement, that is oppression. You are seeking to force on people what by definition they have to freely choose. You have to freely choose your morality or it's not morality at all. When John Adams said our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, he said it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. He was making the point that people can't be free unless they have learned through their religion to freely choose to live by the moral laws that keep them free. You have to freely choose freedom. It's kind of a paradox. And that paradox is built into our legacy. Unlike, say, Patrick Deneen, he's one of the kind of Catholic guys who is now saying that liberalism is inherently flawed because it has no moral system. It simply lets people be free, and ultimately that is going to devour any moral system that comes along. Unlike Patrick Deneen, I think liberalism is a feature, it's not a bug. I think that there's a dangerous mistake embedded in American conservatism. In fact, it's the central mistake in American conservatism in all these ways of trying to address the great forgetting. And I'll get back to that in a second. So I've often described the Western legacy as a structure, like a building, standing on the shoulders of two men, Socrates and Jesus. I don't know if you've ever heard the word telemon. A telemon is a pillar that looks like a man. And the same way, I think it's a katydid. Katydid is that the... No, that's not the right word. That's an insect, but it's something like that for a woman. A pillar is a woman, but a telemon is a pillar that's a man. And Socrates and Jesus are the telemons that hold up Western civilization, and they had a lot in common. And I've talked about this before, but I'm just going to go through it quickly again. Socrates and Jesus both lived at a time, about 300 years apart, when popular movements denied objective truth. Socrates was always in the agora, arguing with the sophists who believed it didn't matter what the truth is, you just had to make a good argument for whatever you were trying to put forward. And Jesus confronted what you might call Hellenic sophisticates like Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate, when Jesus said, "I am the truth," Pontius Pilate kind of shrugged and said, "What is truth?" Both Socrates and Jesus were judicially murdered by the authorities for teaching heresy. That was big-time cancel culture in those days. Both of their philosophies became dominant in the wake of their deaths, and in fact, they kind of became fused. The Greek and the Hebrew tradition became fused in the culture of Rome and in the work of such great Christian Catholic intellectual scholars as St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. But there's one more fascinating parallel between Jesus and Socrates. Neither one of them sought to replace the cultural relativism of their day, the moral relativism of their day, with a set of definitive moral rules. You wouldn't hear this, you wouldn't believe this by talking to some Christians, but neither of them set forward a definite moral philosophy. They both signed on to what C.S. Lewis called the Tao, the universal moral wisdom. Don't murder, don't steal, don't commit sexual immorality. I know the left wants us to forget that system too, but that is a universal moral system. But beyond that, Jesus and Socrates were kind of difficult to pin down. Socrates, all he did was he went out and he asked people questions that destroyed the assumptions of the moment. He questioned, they would get forward, just like, college students today will say, oh, there's systemic racism. Socrates would ask them questions about systemic racism until it became clear that systemic racism was just a hallucination. But he never quite said what there was. He simply destroyed their ideas of what there was. And Jesus mostly told stories. And his life is a story, like the prophets lived story lives, metaphorical lives. And those stories, the parables, are left open to interpretation by the minds of man. So both Socrates and Jesus left a lot of room for interpretation of what they believed morally. They were fighting moral relativism, but they were fighting it with a deep faith in what the poet Wordsworth called humanity's co-creation with the one great mind, the interplay between human beings and God's reality, and our ability to shape out of God's reality some knowable human moral rules. God as known by man, right? God, no one has ever seen God, as the Bible says. God is unknowable. God's moral universe is infinite and therefore unknowable. But there is a moral universe that applies to us, and we are the instruments. Our bodies, our minds, our hearts are the instruments for bringing that moral vision into the world. I've compared this, using Wordsworth's poetry, I've compared this to seeing a rainbow, right? The colors are created by a collaboration of reality and the human eye, of light in the human eye, and we each see those colors differently, but we see them within a limited range. If you look at a rainbow and you see a truck or a tree, you're deluded, just like if you look at a woman and see a man, you're deluded. But we need to learn to see an accurate human interpretation of the infinite and therefore unknowable reality of God. So that's our job, right? The way we do this is by schooling ourselves in the wisdom of the ages and then applying that wisdom to new learning in order to create new wisdom for new ages to come. We're always moving toward the light. We never quite get to the light, not in this world. In order to do this, we have to be educated. We have to read and learn. We have to educate our children. We have to argue with one another in good faith. We have to debate one another in good faith and freely. We have to listen to other people debate. We have to listen to people we despise and listen to people we disagree with. We have to leave aside personal attacks, because personal attacks are always trying to destroy the flawed human vessel instead of examining the ideas that each person contains, the vessel contains. So the left has taken over our institution in the last 70 years, and it's worked within our institutions to destroy our faith, our churches, our traditions, our learning, our academies, and to destroy and even to take away our ability to disagree and to speak freely. The left is now at work demonizing and defunding and deplatforming anyone who opposes their sick, wicked project of forgetting Western culture. But while they may be sick and wicked, we have to hand it to the left, right? They were patient. They took the time, the 70 years it took to do the rotten work they wanted to get done. So if we want to respond, if we respond with theocracy and censorship and leftist-style government overreach, forcing the common good on people, what we think is the common good, that to my mind is an act of panic and desperation. And it's also, if we also just sit around and sob and whine, oh, all is lost, we need a hero to rescue us, bring back Donald Trump, we need a hero, that is also a recipe for inaction and failure, as well as being disgusting behavior. We can't undo 70 patient years of cultural destruction with 4 years of political belligerence. The left's 70-year project of forgetting is reaching fruition. This is their height. They have done what they set out to do. Our 70 years of remembering is just getting started today. We need protests and school board. You see those moms coming into school board meetings? They're the heroes you're looking for. It's not some politician. Those are the heroes, the moms who go in and fight with school boards to make sure their kids aren't taught this filthy critical race theory, which is just bigotry writ large, and the sexual sickness that they're selling in schools. When we vote, we have to vote with some kind of political realism. We have to get people who will actually accomplish the things they say they're going to accomplish, but we also have to vote on the local level and take action at the local level. It's no good voting for the president every 4 years, but not showing up at your school board, not paying attention to what clown is being elected to your school board or your city council or your governorship. And Dennis Prager said this a couple of weeks ago, and I really agree with this. We have to take our children out of their schools. We have to take our children out of their schools and school them at home, form coalitions to school them, we have to form coalitions at work to fight back against HR tyranny in the workplace so they can't force this CRT and sexual perversion down our throats at the corporate level. We have to fight corporate oppression and censorship because it violates our God-given rights just as much as government oppression does. We have to read the books that they condemn. We have to have the debates they censor. We have to read the Bible, teach the Bible, gather in the name of God and praise God and live out God's will in our homes and offices where our children and our colleagues can see us. And we have to fight the reactionary temptation, and instead of trying to match their oppressiveness and hatefulness with our own, we have to sincerely try, and I know you hate to hear this, I hate to hear this, we have to sincerely try to overcome evil with good, because that is at the heart of the Christian project. So I was talking before about the main mistake of the conservative movement. And that mistake, as far as I'm concerned, is to try to defend the past. And if we can't defend the past, then try to restore the past. Instead, I think we should be thinking about a new future that is shaped by our traditions and shaped by the wisdom of the past. Because in this sense, I'm not really a conservative at all. I'm actually a revolutionary. I don't want to destroy the liberal project. I want to fulfill the liberal project. I want to be more liberal. I want to have a world that's even more free than the one the left is destroying. I want one in which an educated people choose freedom and choose morality and believe in their traditions. And that means we have to create a defiant culture, a defiant populace, and with God's help, a defiant church that can succinctly explain the concept of hell to petty tyrants like Gavin Newsom in California and Gretchen von Whitmer in Michigan, because we ought to let them know where they're going to be spending the rest of eternity. We need a church that's informed by science and then informs science with moral reason and revealed wisdom. And the only arguments, and I hear this every time I say these things, the only arguments against this path to American redemption are that it is going to take a long time and it might fail. It's going to take a long time We can't redress 70 years of destruction in 4 years. It's going to take just as long for us to re-infiltrate the institutions as it took for them to take them away. It's going to take the same kind of effort, the same kind of concentration, the same kind of focus, and we might not succeed, okay? Now, if you want to know what I think about that, go look at yourself in the mirror and say to yourself out loud, say, I refuse to make a sustained effort to restore the West for my children because it will take a long time and might fail, all right? And after you've said that, put on your General Patton helmet and slap yourself in the face, and then take up your cross and begin the long, painful work of remembering